Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 44th chapter of Inheritance, written by A is for Amy 71 on AO3. Nomus aren't fun, but at least the Zuku can levitate and Recovery Girl was there to help. But what will happen next? Let's find out after the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe As Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game, and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. It's the next day. Time to find out how much trouble they are in. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 44. In the morning, Bubble Girl came into their room with a cart that had trays of food for them. Izuku had just barely woken up and returned from the bathroom, and Ida and Todoroki were still sleeping. "Hey there, Vanguard!" Bubble Girl said with a grin as she brought him a tray for his lap. There was an American-style breakfast with fried eggs and toast and bacon, but there was still rice and a small container of natto as well. There was a large bottle of orange juice, tea, and milk on the cart, but Izuku still had the water that Gran had brought him the night before. Hey, he answered slowly, wondering why she had stressed his hero name. "Kind of a busy night for you," she said, dragging a chair from the other side of the room over to sit near his bed. "That pretty much sums it up," he agreed, picking up a piece of toast to nibble on. "I don't think you understand how huge this is," she insisted. Todoroki suddenly sat straight up in bed, threw off his blanket and left the room, presumably to visit the bathroom. Bubble Girl hopped up and went to the door, watching where Todoroki was going, then shrugged and returned to the chair. "The media is going absolutely nuts over everything. 3 high school kids were involved in bringing down the hero killer. Endeavor's agency is overrun by reporters right now, and so is UA. "That would be another excellent reason for them not to take us there," Ida said from his own bed. Izuku glanced over at him, relieved that he hadn't been so injured that he needed to sleep for days. He was very unhappy with Ida's poor life choices lately, but he was still his friend. "Good morning," Izuku said quietly, trying to sound as unemotional as possible. There was no need to hash this out in front of Bubble Girl, and the wait would ensure that Izuku had time to think over what he wanted to say before he needed to say it. "Good morning," Ida greeted, sounding wary. "Good morning," Bubble Girl said cheerfully. "I was telling Izuku how the press got wind of how you 3 interns took down the most wanted serial killer in Japan. Want some breakfast?" Ida blinked at her, then sat up with, "Yes, please." Once he had a tray and a glass of orange juice, and Todoroki had come back to the room, Bubble Girl filled them all in. There had been a sighting of Shigaraki and Kurogiri from the USJ attack on a rooftop in Hosu by a news helicopter, but after that, nothing. It seemed like they had simply set the Nomu loose and disappeared. Based on what Shoto had relayed to his father last night, the press were reporting that Stain had been working independently from the League of Villains, and that Stain had implied that the League were also his enemies. The press also knew that Stain had deliberately spared the hero student Vanguard because he believed him to have the makings of a true hero like All Might. "Shit," Izuku whispered at hearing that. Had Torchlight been talking to the press? How else would they have learned that tidbit? Native, maybe? Todoroki looked at him with a raised eyebrow, as if questioning why that part in particular upset him more than the other stuff. Izuku stayed silent, taking another bite of his breakfast. "So," Bubble Girl told them, stealing one of Izuku's pieces of toast and biting in. You three are headline news all over Japan. Everyone's freaking out because you vanished with some old guy in a helicopter, and no one knows where you went. I see, Ida said, having eaten very little. What about my old man? Todoroki asked. Oh, he's here somewhere, Bubble Girl said cheerfully. Midoriya's dad actually spit literal fire when he heard that Endeavor had left his son to deal with a serial killer on his own. And All Might had to talk him down and promise to have a very long talk with Endeavor about it. They've been holed up in All Might's office for over an hour now. If you ask me, they should have let Midoriya-san read him the riot act. Todoroki's lips actually twitched at hearing that. Anyway, that's the latest news. I have to go make some rounds and check on some things. Someone will come down and let you know what happens from here on out in a little while. She got to her feet then, ruffled Izuku's hair, and headed out of the room. That was a lot, Izuku said into the silence she left in her wake. I don't deserve the credit for helping apprehend him, Ida said, sounding miserable. It's my fault any of you were in the situation to begin with. True, Shoto said bluntly. Izuku stared at him for a moment to see if he was going to further elaborate, but when Todoroki just picked up his chopsticks and began to eat, shook his head. Ida, what were you doing there in the first place? Native isn't with Manuel's agency, is he? Izuku asked. No, he isn't, Ida confirmed. I abandoned my post at Manuel's side to go looking for Stain. I wanted revenge for what he did to my brother. He fisted his hands in the sheets of his bed and fought to master the emotional tidal wave that was trying to crash over him. Why didn't you talk to someone about it? Izuku asked. He knew he hadn't been the best friend to Ida. Even though both he and Uraraka had offered a listening ear, was there really any reason he would have confided in him? Did they know each other well enough for him to trust them that way? Izuku came to the painful conclusion that if their positions had been reversed, Ida would not have been the first person he sought out to talk about it. He probably wouldn't have even been the first of his peers. Though he liked Ida, and was beginning to consider him a good friend. I couldn't, Ida said simply. I was just filled with too much rage. Revenge was all I could think about. It made me reckless and blind. True, Shoto agreed. You really didn't think it through. Izuku made a mental note to find out how to introduce Todoroki to some tact at some point, but Ida simply nodded. Getting credit for it is too much, Ida said. I should feel lucky I haven't been arrested for vigilantism. The day's not over yet, Gran said from the doorway. Ida looked nonplussed by the statement, but nodded. It would be no more than I deserved. Gran grunted at that, but strode in and stared at them all. Who are you anyway? Shoto asked. Oh, that's Gran Torino, Izuku said brightly. He helped train All Might when he was at UA. Your knowledge of heroes is certainly outstanding, Midoriya, Ida said approvingly. Such an obscure fact probably isn't even common knowledge, and yet you've managed to ferret it out. Oh, Izuku hedged, scratching the back of his head in consternation. Yeah, I'm a real fanboy, all right. He hoped the excuse would be enough to stave off suspicion. He kept forgetting that his classmate didn't know about his connection to All Might past having met him once as a kid. You kids are gonna have a visitor a little later, Gran told them without preamble. The chief of police for Hosu City wants to talk to you about Stain, and he would like it to be a photo-op press conference. The Hero Public Safety Commission, in their infinite wisdom, thinks it would be a good idea, since it shines a positive light on UA after the debacle that went down at the USJ. Won't it look weird that we're in Might Tower for that? Shoto asked. That's why you're not gonna be here. You're gonna get dressed and be taken to UA. where they're already setting up for it. Someone's gonna drop off uniforms for you shortly, Gran explained. What should we say? Izuku said uneasily. You shouldn't have to say much, he said. They probably read a statement and spin it however they want, and you kids will just stand there looking perfectly healthy, sane, and unharmed. If they ask you questions you don't know how to answer, toss them back at one of your teachers or the police chief, got it? He looked at each of them in turn until they nodded. I'm too old for this crap, Gran muttered as he turned to go. They watched him head for the door, but he turned and pointed at Ida. Keep your trap shut to the press about revenge. If you want to spill your guts to the authorities after that, do what you want. Ida's jaw tightened and he gave a resolute nod. Shoto finished eating his breakfast as if he hadn't a care in the world, while Ida pushed his mostly unfinished tray away and left for the bathroom. Izuku decided he should eat, even though he didn't feel all that hungry, because the day was bound to be a long one. How about Ice Blaze? Izuku said suddenly, looking at Todoroki. Todoroki just looked at him blankly. For a hero name! I've been trying to think of something that matches your quirk, Izuku clarified. It was true. Izuku had been idly thinking of names that would suit Todoroki, Kachan, and Ida, since they hadn't chosen yet. Ida had said something about taking his brother's name, but Izuku wondered if that was a good idea. If Ingenium wanted to get back into hero work eventually, wouldn't that be weird? Ice Blaze, Todoroki repeated, seeming to test it out to see how it felt. I'm not so sure. You could also go with Axis, since that's a line that something rotates around like your powers having a line between them, Izuku suggested, or Paragon, since you're looking to be a better example than your father. Ida returned at that point and sat in the chair that Bubble Girl had vacated. I like Axis, he said, tossing his opinion out. Paragon sounds a bit arrogant, I think. Ooh, how about Tempest? Izuku said, because when hot and cold combine in nature, you get a storm. That's a good one, Ida agreed. It sounds formidable and just cool. Tempest, Todoroki said slowly. Tempest. I like it, declared a new voice. Izuku and Ida shouted and jumped to their feet at the sight of a face sticking out of the wall. Todoroki stared blankly at it as if this sort of thing happened every day. Sorry, the new voice said. The face in the wall emerged further into the room, followed by a body. He had blonde hair and simple features and was wearing a hero costume. It had a white top and boots and blue pants. He wore a red cape too, and had the number 1,000,000 in yellow on the front, right under his cape fastening. Who are you? Izuku asked, even though he had a strong suspicion that he already knew. Togata Mirio, he said cheerfully, giving a little salute, also known as Lemillion. Why are you here? Izuku asked. No one was supposed to know about us being here. Whoops, sorry. Everyone was acting a little weird, so I decided to poke around and see if I could figure out why, Togata said, sounding at least a little bit chagrined. Do All Might and Sir know you're down here? Lemillion, came a sharp voice from the doorway. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight of Sir Night Eye looking angry, which didn't happen all that often. Togata seemed to realize he was in trouble too. Sir, I was just checking out the— Enough! I told you to stay on the upper floors, Sir told him sternly. Well, in the grand scheme of things, this is part of the upper floors, isn't it? Togata tried, sounding hopeful. Izuku saw a telltale lip twitch on Sir's face before he schooled his features. You're to forget you were here and that they were here, Sir told Togata sternly. Already done. Togata disappeared back the way he came, leaving the three boys staring at the blank wall. I apologize for the intrusion of my intern, Sir told them, straightening his glasses. He's from UA? Izuku asked. A third year, Sir confirmed, with a remarkable quirk and a mischievous streak. Izuku remembered that he wasn't supposed to be too familiar with Sir, so he simply nodded and settled back on his bed. Many people knew about All Might's sidekick, so it shouldn't be too unusual to be a little more forward. He certainly took us by surprise, Ida said. Are you sure he's trustworthy? Quite, Sir said with a nod. He may be a little rambunctious, but he knows the importance of discretion. Your school uniforms will be delivered within the next half an hour. I'm sorry there is no access to bathing facilities on this floor, but they will also deliver basic grooming and hygiene supplies as well. They all nodded. Thank you, sir, Izuku said. No thanks needed. You three likely saved a lot of lives last night. Accommodating you for a few hours is the least he can do, Sir answered. Then he looked at Izuku and said, Stay out of trouble. He makes it seem like I'm always in trouble, Izuku murmured as Sir left. Aren't you? Shoto asked. No, Izuku denied. Well, not always anyway. It seems like you put yourself in the middle of things a lot, Shoto said with a shrug. You do tend to be in the center of whatever's going on, Ida agreed. Really? Izuku asked, mildly surprised. I mean, things have been crazy lately, but... You do realize that the 2 times I've seen you encounter villains, they both knew you by name? Ida asked with an arched eyebrow. Really? Izuku couldn't really deny it. Shigaraki when we were in the USJ, and last night with Stain, Shoto supplied. Izuku sighed and wondered if his therapist gave group discounts. He had a feeling his entire class would probably benefit from it. Their uniforms arrived and the boys got dressed. They were herded down the elevator to a parking garage, where a large, dark-windowed van was waiting. When they got to UA, they were escorted inside. As expected, Endeavor was there, as was Manuel, the chief of police, Principal Nezu, and Aizawa. Izuku was mildly surprised to see Aizawa in an actual suit. Less expected were Midoriya's father, who always wore a suit, and Ida's parents. Izuku didn't need an introduction to tell who they were. His friend bore a striking resemblance to his father, who had engines in his shoulders, if the bulk of his suit jacket was any indication. You boys had quite the adventure, Nezu told them, his gaze lingering on Ida. I'm pleased to see you are all safe and able to stand here with us today. All 3 bowed with varying degrees of enthusiasm. This press conference may seem a bit intense, but it's the best way to deal with the situation and get all of the questions out of the way for the moment. If anyone asks you a direct question about what happened, you can simply say that the matter is still under police investigation, and you're not at liberty to talk about it. You may answer any other kind of questions, or not. The choice is yours. Remaining silent hardly ever hurts with things like this. Again his gaze lingered on Ida, who was nodding in understanding that he was not to jeopardize the reputation of the school in any way. The chief of police approached then, and Izuku vaguely recognized him from the news. He had the head of a beagle, and tended to pepper his speech occasionally with a growl or a soft barking noise. He wondered if, like Hound Dog, he lost his faculty for human speech when he got overly upset or angry. He also vaguely wondered, inappropriately and apropos of nothing, what he'd look like if Izuku patted his head. Good afternoon. I'm Chief Suragame from the Hosu City Police, the man said. I owe you 3 boys a debt that cannot be repaid for helping to keep my city safe. All 3 boys bowed again. I understand that Stain's takedown was highly unconventional. Woof! It's also my understanding from eyewitnesses' accounts and your mentor's testimony that in the chaos and confusion of the 3 monsters that were rampaging, you became separated from your supervisors. Mr. Ida, you were the first to stumble upon the scene, is that correct? Ida looked stricken at the question, but gulped audibly and said, "No, sir. Native was the first on the scene." Yes, woof, Surigame said with a nod. Normally you would not have been allowed to use your quirk in confronting a criminal to save a victim without your supervisor there, woof. But since you became separated from him in the confusion and stumbled upon the scene, then quickly turned into a case of self-defense, it's entirely excusable. Ida swallowed audibly again, but the chief simply stared at him for a long, meaningful moment and moved on. Izuku had a very strong feeling that the chief knew exactly what had happened and was feeding Ida the story he was to repeat to anyone who asked. Next on the scene was Torchlight, who noticed something awry in the alley and went to investigate, woof, leaving Midoriya to wait for his clearance, correct? Izuku nodded and gave a quick, "Yes, sir, I only went to check on him when he didn't come back. That's when I found out what was going on." Again, in normal circumstances, you should have run for help instead of engaging the villain, he said sternly. But being as most other heroes were elsewhere dealing with a different catastrophe, woof, and Torchlight had been put in charge of you by your mentor, woof, we can concede that you technically had proper hero supervision in the use of your quirk. Torchlight confirms that without your intervention, there would have most certainly have been fatalities. Izuku didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and looked at his shoes. Todoroki, woof, you received a plea for help from Midoriya, the chief continued. Since Midoriya did not have a way to directly contact Endeavor, which is inexcusable, woof, he chose the next best option and used his phone, woof, to contact you, who was being directly supervised by Endeavor. Why is it that you chose to go to his aid alone? Endeavor was directly engaging with one of the Nomu, Shoto said. Momonga had already left to pursue a different one. There was nothing I could do there but get in the way, so I went to see if I could help Vanguard. I see, woof. I suppose that the blanket of protection there can be spread to you as well, since Torchlight was present to supervise. Shoto simply nodded, with a shrug as if to say, sure, why not? No matter the circumstances that led to all of you being in that alley, I am deeply grateful that you were able to work together to apprehend one of the most dangerous men in Japan. Thank you. With these words, Chief Surigame bent at the waist, bowing to them. After that awkward moment, when Izuku noticed his father tearing up, they were all directed to follow the principal out to a grassy area where a small stage had been erected. There were 2 rows of chairs for the interns, their mentors and their families, and a small dais with a half a dozen microphones attached to it. Everything at the press conference went exactly as they'd been told it would, except for Izuku and his friends being surprised to receive an official commendation from Chief Surigame. Izuku's dad smiled through misty eyes when Izuku was handed a creamy piece of expensive parchment with the printed award on it. Then things took a strange turn. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. I think Trouble may be Izuku's middle name, but who knows, he got a certificate for his actions. Though I do think the chief of police is barking mad. I'll see myself out. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of my next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah.